one of the areas that I'm very much interested in. Carbon pricing, obviously, coming out of the Article 6 mechanism for using market systems to try and address the problem of climate change. And it's a pleasure to be moderating this session, to be hearing from very, very experienced people on the panel today. I won't waste any time at all. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this webinar. And our first speaker is Octavio Canuto. And Octavio has, how shall we even put it, a very impressive record in economics. There's so much to say. He is a non-resident senior fellow in the Global Economic and Development Program at the Brookings Institution. He's also principal of the Center for Macroeconomics and Development. Obviously, he's a well-respected researcher. He's a thought leader, and he's a published author of many books in economics. He has experience managing knowledge networks and providing strategic advice to senior management of multilateral institutions, of governments, private investors. He's also a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. His experience includes 15 years as vice president, executive director, senior advisor in multilateral institutions, including the World Bank, the IMF, and the Inter-American Development Bank. And he is here to offer his very unique perspectives on integrating carbon pricing into broader economic development strategies, especially for us here on the African continent. So on that note, I invite you, Octavio, to please take us through your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, Antonio, and well, it's a pleasure to be here, and particularly addressing such an important issue. In fact, recently, beginning of this year, Reem Berahab, who's a senior economist at the Policy Center for the New South, and I published a project syndicate piece on how to make carbon pricing work for Africa. That's the idea. The fact is that, of course, carbon pricing is a crucial climate policy tool. By assigning a monetary value to greenhouse gas emissions, carbon pricing creates incentives for firms to emit less, and also this assignment of a monetary value generates revenues that can be spent on sustainable development. Fact is that more than 70 jurisdictions worldwide have already implemented carbon taxes or emissions trading systems as a way to reconcile economic growth with climate objectives, either taxes or a cap in trade. And of course, these systems differ among those 70 jurisdictions. You have in some cases mandatory carbon pricing, some others as an option. The fact of the matter is that, the world has been moving toward recognizing the carbon pricing as a tool, as a crucial one for climate policy. And as aptly said by Antonio, the international community has, in recent times, focused on strengthening the frameworks for global carbon markets. Last year, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, we had the finalization of the negotiations on the Article 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement, which aims, that's the objective, to standardize such markets. And of course, this involved this negotiation adopting rules to facilitate the cross-border cooperation on emissions reduction projects. C, while the transparency and accountability provided by these rules will almost surely build trust in carbon markets, that's the idea, the point that we made is that a standardized framework poses some risks for Africa. See, more specifically, it could fail to address the continent's needs, exacerbating inequality and impeding development. We must be, sometimes there is a trade-off between, for instance, carbon policies, carbon-related policies, and income distribution. And we have to make sure that in Africa, the implementation of the agenda is done in a way that minimize the risks. See, let me be more specific. Today, nearly 600 million Africans still lack access to electricity, while biomass accounts for 45% of the continent's energy supply. Leaving rural and low-income households particularly vulnerable to carbon pricing policies that are not tailored to Africa's unique socioeconomic and environmental realities. A flat carbon tax, for example, that is not accompanied by targeted subsidies, government investment, and international financing, could disproportionately burden rural and low-income households, keeping them in poverty and hindering electrification efforts. That's the point that I made about being careful in the simple utilization of standardized mechanisms. So the shift to renewables requires significant upfront spending on infrastructure, and carbon pricing must be structured to facilitate, not obstruct this transition. Well, moreover, Africa is, I don't have to tell anybody, acutely vulnerable to climate shocks. As we have seen with the recurring droughts in the Sahel, the catastrophic floods in Mozambique. On average, African countries lose something between 2 to 5% of GDP per year to climate change, right? And many of the African countries divert up to 9% of their annual budget to respond to extreme weather events, putting a severe strain on their economies. To tailor carbon pricing models to Africa's realities, so policymakers should push for the strategic reinvestment of any resulting revenue in essential sectors such as education, healthcare, and renewables. Let me give you an example of a good thing done in that regard. South Africa. In South Africa, proceeds from the country's carbon tax have been channeled into clean energy projects, expanding access to solar power in underserved regions. So the idea is that such revenue recycling mitigates carbon pricing's regressive effects while also tackling energy poverty and fostering inclusive development. Let me also mention another aspect that is fundamental. Pursuing a phased implementation of carbon pricing models with initially modest price would enable African countries to adapt gradually to the demands of a green economy without stifling growth. At the same time, the slow and steady development of frameworks for measuring, reporting, and verification would make it easier to identify and rectify errors. which will result in more robust and trustworthy systems. This approach, right, it minimizes the economic shocks often associated with abrupt transitions, offering a practical pathway to sustainable development. Also, public-private partnerships can be a powerful tool for mobilizing investment in green technology and carbon credit projects, and for aligning environmental and social objectives. In my years as a vice president at the World Bank, where I had 700 economists reporting to me on issues like strategies of poverty reduction, public sector management and governance, public debt dynamics, international trade, and gender equality, a cut across component of policies that we advised the countries they had to do, and they showed clearly how public-private partnerships are a powerful tool for that, right? For mobilizing investment. In our case here, in the green technology and carbon, and also the carbon credit projects can be, aligned with environmental and social objectives. A good example is Rwanda's Clean Cooking Initiative, which used private sector expertise and funding to distribute efficient cook stoves. This has reduced emissions and has improved health outcomes for rural households. Though that's a good example. Well, leveraging nature-based solutions is equally important. Let me illustrate this. Africa's rainforest, wetlands, and peatlands store vast amounts of carbon, with the Congo Basin alone holding more than 30 billion tons of CO2. I'm Brazilian, and that's the case as well of the Amazon. And this point about the role played by these areas should be able to generate a value in the context of what we're discussing here. So these assets, like the ones that I referred to, the Africa's rainforests, wetlands, and peatlands, could generate high-quality carbon credits, which would attract international financing and preserve critical ecosystems. Take the multi-donor UN-hosted Central African Forest Initiative. Gabon's pioneering carbon credits program has conserved huge portions of its forests. As a result, Gabon secured a commitment of $150 million over 10 years that was obtained through an agreement signed off with CAFI in 2019. Of course, the point here is about the immense potential that carbon pricing has to address Africa's climate and development needs. But one must take into account that barriers to implementation remain, and overcoming those barriers will require carefully targeted interventions. Of course, institutional weaknesses could undermine robust measurement, reporting, and verification, which are essential for ensuring credibility and attracting investments. International organizations such as the UN Environment Program and the World Bank, the old World Bank, can assist with the operationalization of carbon pricing mechanisms in African countries by providing technical training and supporting the development of the necessary infrastructure. Another important aspect is ensuring social acceptance of carbon pricing. And this constitutes another challenge for African countries, as in many other parts of the world. Why? Because these policies can trigger public backlash if they are perceived as unjust or even just poorly explained. Governments must be transparent about reinvesting the revenue that they generate. That's quite important. And such a backlash, we have seen how, for instance, this has hampered the implementation of policies in Europe. So, uh, with ensuring the social acceptance by being transparent about the reinvestment of the revenue generated by carbon pricing is fundamental, so as to not generate any sort of a resistance socially. Well, it's also important, right, that the funds obtained with carbon pricing will fall short of meeting Africa's energy and infrastructure needs, which are substantial. So in this case, the complementary tools such as green bonds, blended finance mechanisms, right, and international climate finance can help bridge the gap. A Pan-African carbon market coordinated through institutions like the African Continental Free Trade Area could consolidate fragmented national efforts into a unified platform. Such a market would lower entry barriers for smaller economies, would also streamline standards and attract international investment. It would also bolster Africa's role in advancing nature-based climate solutions, allowing the continent to deliver global emissions reductions while supporting local communities. See, over my 15 years at multilateral institutions, as a vice president at the World Bank, a vice president at the IDB, but particularly at the World Bank and my time at the IMF, several analysis reports have been offered about the price that Africa pays for being, to a large extent, fragmented. You have many small countries, and so the way Africa needs not only to connect itself in physical terms through infrastructure investments, but also efforts like the African Continental Free Trade Area are important because they may allow smaller countries to circumvent the lack of scale. So Africa needs to be less fragmented, and that's where uh, Pan-African carbon market would be extremely helpful. Okay, I'm going to the end. We are preparing ourselves for the COP30 in Belém, Brazil, right? And there, the African countries have an opportunity to advocate for equitable carbon pricing mechanisms that align climate action with sustainable development, not simply the climate action, but in ways that make sure that the sustainable development objectives are not left aside. While cutting emissions is important, right? So too is ensuring fairness and equity for the communities most vulnerable to climate change. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Otaviano. So much has been said and yet with so little words. Thanks so much. We are going to have next our second speaker, who is going to share some more practical and more hands-on experience regarding Ghana's work in terms of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And a few minutes ago, less than half an hour ago, that person would have been Dr. Daniel Benefo, but unfortunately, he has had to join another very important meeting. But we are not without help. We do have on this webinar someone who has also worked very closely with Dr. Benefo on the Article 6 work for Ghana, and she is in the person of Mrs. Juliana Bempa. She is a principal program officer at the Environmental Protection Authority in Ghana. Mrs. Bempa is a climate change expert, and she has supported a team as a team lead for Ghana's greenhouse gas inventory from 2008 up until now. She's currently working, as I said, in Dr. Benefo's outfit with the Ghana Carbon Market Office, where she provides administrative and technical support to the general public and also support implementation of the Ghana International Carbon Market and non-market approaches framework under the Paris Agreement. She's also project assistant for Ghana's Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency project. She's also serving as a technical expert on the UNFCCC roster of experts and has conducted several reviews on greenhouse gas inventories for Annex 1 countries and technical analysis for biennial update reports. She's also a lead reviewer of greenhouse gas inventories. Mrs. Bempa, thanks so much for joining us at such short notice to fill in for Dr. Benefo. We'll hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope I'm very much audible. It's actually a pleasure to be here with you and then to share with you some practical information on what we are doing on carbon market, and then for you to also have some insight when it comes to carbon market implementation on the ground. So if you'd allow me, I'll quickly share my screen and then we can start the presentation.
See your screen now, ma'am. We can see your screen.
I can see my screen. Great. So is that okay? So once again, the CMO would also want to say a big thank you for the opportunity to share exactly what we are doing in our office. So if you look at the GHG emission profile for the entire Africa, you realize that Africa accounts for actually just about 4% of the global emissions. Just a moment. Okay, just to save some bandwidth, and then we can continue. Okay, right. Okay, so Africa just contributes about 4% of the total global emissions. If you look at the chart on your right-hand side, you realize that Nigeria contributes the most, about 70%, followed by Mali, we have Cote d'Ivoire, and then Ghana contributes just about 4% to the total emissions so far as Africa is concerned. However, Ghana is also among the top 5 GHG emitters when it comes to ECOWAS. The 2019 emissions estimates that we did indicates that approximately 60 million tons of emissions is represented by 86 rise in emissions in 10 years back. And if you look at the projected emissions that we did, On a do-nothing trajectory, Ghana's emission is about 100 million tons by 2030. And if you also put in place measures in terms of climate actions, our NDC reveals that our emission reduction will be around 64 million tons by 2030 on a mitigation pathway. And as a country, we decided to use Article 6 or carbon market as one of the ways to be able to mobilize finance to achieve and then be able to raise our ambition and also be able to reach a net zero target by the 2060 we've indicated. On the policy front, we all know that without very clear, consistent, and robust policies, carbon market wouldn't be able to function effectively or equitably. In that sense, we have quite a number of policies that we have outlined, and these policies provide legal and enforceable and also ensures compliance for businesses. Again, these policies also help us to define the scope. Those people who have had the opportunity to look at Ghana's NDCs, it's sector focused. And based on that, we have been able to also come up with the gases for each of these sectors. Again, the policies help set very credible reduction targets. And so for each of the sectors, we have very credible reduction targets for them. Also, when it comes to MRV processes, with these policies, it helps us to also prevent issues of double counting. And so we have our national policies that are relevant for climate change, and this includes the Ghana at 100 framework and its accompanying national infrastructure plan. We have the coordinated program of economic and social development policy, and then the medium-term development policy framework. On the strategies, we have the national climate change policy, the adaptation strategy, the climate service framework, and then the low carbon development strategy, and of course, our nationally determined contributions. As I indicated earlier on, we have sectors that also make sure that we come up with target. And so these sectors have their own sector-specific policies that contribute to climate transition and also help Ghana to reduce emissions. And so we have the sustainable financing framework, the national energy policy, the national energy transition framework, that was led by the Ministry of Environment. And then we also have the National Energy Transition Plan, which also comes with an investment plan. That was led by Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology. And then the Renewable Energy Act has been amended. It's one of the sectoral policies that we also look at. We have the electric mobility and the Green Cooling Plan, the National RED Plus, and then the Climate Smart Agriculture Action Plan. We're now looking at how we can also develop a policy for hydrogen, in that we've started receiving some application on hydrogen projects. And so there's the need to also come up with a hydrogen policy on that front. With the outlook of Ghana's NDCs, we actually have 47 program of actions, looking at 19 policy actions, 11 sectors we're focused on, and then we have 8 socioeconomic outcomes. In as much as Africa requires about $300 billion to implement its climate actions, for Ghana with NDC 2.0, that was submitted in 2021, it's looking at a budget of about 9.3 to 15.5 billion within the 10-year framework. The accounting front, so far as our NDCs are concerned, our base year emission is 59 million ton CO2 equivalent. However, with the BTR that was developed, we also submitted a standalone GAG inventory. And with that, we did a recalculation with the base year, or sorry, the latest year being 2022. And on that, the recalculation that we did, the base year, we had emission reductions of 50.2 million tons CO2 equivalent. With the business as usual emissions by 2030, our emissions would have risen up to about 100 million tons CO2 equivalent at the do-nothing trajectory. We actually adopted a fixed level single year target, and with that, on the unconditional measures, meaning that at the time of development of the action, the climate actions, government had secured some source of funding to be able to implement those actions. And with that, we intend to reduce our emissions by approximately 25 million tons CO2 equivalent. And with a conditional, meaning that we would need carbon financing to be able to implement those measures, we intend to reduce our emissions by 39 million tons CO2 equivalent by 2030, of which Ghana intends to use about 24 million tons CO2 equivalent for carbon market transactions. When it comes to carbon market transactions, we managed to authorize 4 main projects within the improved cook stove sector, waste to compost, rice, alternative wet and dry, and then we also have the e-bikes. And with these 4 authorizations that we've done so far, it totals up to 6.65 million tons CO2 equivalent. And with the improved cook stove, the emission reduction potential of that particular project is looking at about 3.2 million tons CO2 equivalent. The composting is looking at 1.5 million tons CO2 equivalent, while the sustainable rice cultivation is looking at 1.2 million tons CO2 equivalent. The project that was authorized just about a month ago is on the e-bikes for the gig economy. And with that particular project, the emission reduction potential is around 0.75 million tons CO2 equivalent. Currently, we are about to do our first issuance. We may do that in the next 2 weeks, and that is going to be the highest IDMOs that would have been issued. And that is around 11,000 tons CO2 equivalent of IDMOs that will be issued in the next 2 weeks, sorry. We are yet to do the transfers. We'll do the issuance and then we'll do the transfer. And then on ITMO that has been cancelled and retired, we haven't done that yet. We have also not done any CA or applied any CAs yet. On operationalizing international carbon market, our NDC has actually identified international carbon markets for mobilizing carbon finance to support implementation and also to be able to help Ghana raise its ambition. Why did we choose to go into carbon market and to be able to strategize and establish a national arrangement to implement carbon market in Ghana? We actually learned from the past where during the CDM era, we performed very poorly. We didn't really have any CARs issued as at that time. And this was because we didn't have any robust national arrangement in place. Capacity was quite low. And so we didn't take advantage of the CDM era. And with this particular Article 6.2 era, Ghana is really ready and prepared to take advantage of the system. And so we have a carbon market framework that is available. As most of you know, Ghana is actually one of the forerunners when it comes to Article 6.2 operationalization. And in that framework, we also have sections on voluntary carbon market, and we also have Article 6.4 mechanism also well outlined with the procedures in the Ghana carbon market framework. We also looked at how we can increase the private sector participation when it comes to our NDC actions. We have also been able to establish a carbon market office with staff also there providing both administrative and technical assistance in operationalizing the carbon market framework. We have also developed the Ghana Carbon Registry. This was actually developed internally to be able to do tracking and then reporting of ITMOs that will be issued on other registries. And we are also in talks with other registries on how we can connect their system to our system. Of course, there are different actors within this space. As we are all aware, at the national government front, which is usually called the host country front, we are there to provide both policy and regulation with regards to carbon market. Again, when it comes to approval processes and then authorization, it's usually done by the government or the host country. In this sense, if you look at the 4 authorizations that have been done, the Carbon Market Office or CMO provided the draft statement of authorization and then the letters of authorizations based on requests that were given or issued by the project developers. And this was actually approved by the Minister in charge of Environment. We are also responsible as a national government when it comes to recording and then tracking the assets, both on our registry and also on other international registries. We also do apply the corresponding adjustment. We do the reporting, and then when it comes to issues of benefit sharing arrangement, we also have some proposals that we plan to use. On the cooperating party or the receiving country in this sense, when you look at the agreements that we've signed so far, authorization is done by both parties, and then the receiving country receives the assets and then pays for the assets and also does reporting. We also have project owners within this space, and they would have to do the project identification, look at the feasibility of the project or mitigation activity, and how they intend to develop the project. They also sign commercial agreements with countries or with other parties that are of relevant to them. We also have validation and verification and the monitoring and settlement exercises along this value chain. We have standards, which is very much important because it's with these standards that we are able to develop the baseline and then come up with MRV methodologies based on which emission reductions are verified or are considered additional, or measurement is also undertaken in that regard. And then we also have independent auditors who do the validation and then the verification along the value chain. So this slide shows the processes that as a project developer, if you'd want to engage Ghana on the carbon market front, you'd have to go through, it's about 15 processes that you'd have to go through before ITMOs are transferred. And so as a host country or as a project developer, the first thing that you'd have to do is to look at the projects that are eligible, what we consider as whitelist. And these whitelist, we have listed them in our carbon market framework. So you'd have to look at the whitelist of projects and then you can apply. We have red list, and this red list are projects that are actually part of the unconditional target. And so they are a no-go area for us. We think it's a low-hanging fruit that as a country we will be able to implement. So you can only go into our whitelist and then based on that develop a project, or you can also go into the VCM space. You would have to request to create an account with us, based on which we would send you the requisite forms for you to complete. You will be rightly onboarded on our system, pay a couple of fees that we have outlined in our Ghana Carbon Market Framework, which is Schedule 11. You can find that in our Carbon Market Framework with all those details. Now, you'd also have to submit a mitigation activity idea note. It's optional, but we always request that you send in your main, because it's based on which will be able to guide you properly on which route to take. And then you can also apply for a letter of intent. LOI is also optional depending on the project developer. When it comes to a letter of assurance, before you can request for a letter of assurance, you would have to, it's also one of the letters that is also optional. And depending on the project developer, you can also apply for that. So after you've submitted these, the main document, and we have okayed it, you will then be written to go ahead and then submit a mitigation activity design document or a PDD, depending on the standard you're using. And this will be considered by a technical advisory committee. And when this is considered, the committee would either recommend that you proceed to validation, and then based on the validation report, you can also initiate authorization. And then after requesting for authorization, we'll then issue you with a letter of authorization and an authorization statement, which can be in the public domain. We usually put it on our website and then the UNFCCC website as well. That is the authorization statement. So you do your validation, submit your validation report, and then within that time, the CMO also prepares the initial report and then submits to the UNFCCC. You go ahead and do your implementation, and then depending on the standard you're using, you do your registration. And then after you've done the implementation, monitoring will take place. A verification is done by an independent verifier. And then examination or the ex-post authorization would also be done. After which, if all is said and done, and you've been able to check all the boxes, we'll do the issuance, we'll do the transfer, corresponding adjustment will be done, and then we'll go ahead and do the annual reporting or regular information will be shared in our BTR. So on the agreements that we've signed so far, we've signed 3 main agreements with the government of Switzerland, which is the very first one, was signed in 2020. Then we have the Ghana-Sweden one was signed just last year in May. It went through the approval processes, same as the Ghana-Singapore agreement. It went through the Attorney General approval processes. It was submitted to Cabinet for approval before Parliament approved it, and it was signed. And we currently have that of Ghana, Korea, with the AG review has also been completed. It's also went to Cabinet for approval, but due to change in government, it's not been signed. And we hope that it will be signed as soon as possible. We also conducting or commenced technical negotiations with the government of Liechtenstein. On the private sector front, we also engage in Mercuria. We've signed MOU with Mercuria. We also exchanged letters of intent with Trafigura Environmental Solutions. We've also had a mission in Ghana somewhere 2023 with Marubeni Corporation, and then British Petroleum. We actually have advanced with them when it comes to negotiations of the agreement has been completed. We currently going through with the Attorney General's Department on the review of the agreement. These are the project development options that we have. We have the green line, the blue line, the brown line, and the yellow line. The green line looks at government-to-government bilateral cooperation, where both countries will do the authorization, and then we'll also look at the use of the ITMOs. We have the blue line that looks at the government to private unilateral engagement, and that's what I just spoke about, that we currently advance with British Petroleum. On the VCM front, we have VCM without corresponding adjustment. We also have VCM with corresponding adjustment, and that is the same as what we have as the blue line. And we also have the Article 6.4, as you've seen on the yellow line. without institutions, we wouldn't be able to have a very robust system and then ensure that Ghana's carbon market is conducted in a very transparent manner. And so we have institutions that have been put together to be able to ensure that carbon market in Ghana runs very smoothly. And so after you submit your documents to the CMO, it has to go through the technical advisory committee. We also have a board for carbon market transactions, or that also ensures that approval processes when it comes to eligibility of projects, when it comes to methodology development, it comes to accrediting standards, and then doing authorization, and then applying corresponding adjustment. We also have a board that has been set up to be able to implement those issues. A little bit of highlight for 2024, some achievements, and then what we have been able to implement so far. So we have been able to come up with a law. We passed the EPA Act, Environmental Protection Act 1124, 2025. And in this particular act, we have sections 148 to 159 being dedicated to carbon market. And we thought this was a really big achievement for us, because for us to have carbon market issues being captured in our act, we were very much happy with that. We have also been able to develop a cook stove guideline. It's being finalized, and we hope that by mid-year we would have been able to finalize it. Again, we're looking at how we can procure a consultant to develop a fraction of non-renewable biomass value for Ghana. Even though there is an international value, which is just around 30%, we plan to develop our own country-specific FNRB figure. And this process has also advanced. We also, in 2024, participated in Article 6 initial report review. And we did about 3 project authorization, and this year we've managed to do only 1. We have about 25 VCM projects that is requesting onboarding, of which 20 of them are seeking for authorization, and we have only 5 of them that it's seeking for letter of endorsement. Currently, as at December 2024, we had 68 projects in our pipeline, but as we speak now, we have about 8 to 9 projects in our pipeline. And we also participated in about 26 carbon market outreach programs. Okay, so we also trying to see how we can build or have a facility named Carbon Market Office. And this facility has been put up, is about 85% completed. Last year, we also managed to submit our national inventory report, the 6th one, and then we also submitted our BTR1 to the UNFCCC. Again, we had 2 joint committees that were established under the Sweden and Singapore bilateral agreement. So this slide also shows some of the milestones that we have been able to achieve. We have 7 of our projects that are currently under validation. We have 17 of our projects being onboarded on the Ghana Carbon Registry. And as I mentioned to you, currently we have about 89 projects in our pipeline. One of the projects has finished. We finished with examination stage, and we'll be doing the issuance in the next 2 weeks. So 68 projects as of December 2024. Currently, we have 89 of them, of which 43 projects are under 4 bilateral engagement, 20 VCM projects that is seeking for authorization, and then we also have 5 VCM projects that is seeking endorsement. If you look at this slide, with the 68 projects that we had as of December 2024, these projects had a potential emission reduction request of about 402 million tons CO2. And these projects, 68 projects, were seeking for authorization, of which we have only about 24 million tons of carbon credits that is available for authorization. It means that we really have to look at our NDC baselines again when we are reviewing for our third submission. The breakdown, we have the Ghana-Switzerland agreement under implementation. We have 14 applications. These have all been onboarded and at different stages of implementation. The Swiss project is looking at EVs, clean cooking, HFC cooling, biogas, compost, the sustainable rice cultivation, charcoal production, biomass electricity, and then wastewater treatment. The Ghana-Sweden agreement is also looking at only energy-related projects. So it's looking at off-grid systems, it's looking at commercial and industrial applications, and then EVs. The Ghana-Singapore agreement, as of December 2024, we had 18 applications. Currently, we have about 29 applications, and it's looking at all sectors. So we have soil regeneration, electric stoves, water treatment, mangrove restoration, biodiesel, hydrogen stoves, biomass stoves, and then LPG stoves. On the Ghana-South Korea, we've received only 5 applications focusing on landfill gas, charcoal stoves, sustainable charcoal, and then water treatment. With the Ghana-Liechtenstein one, we are still at negotiations. This is the technology charts. We have clean cooking being the highest, contributing about 32.7%, followed by e-mobility and then the afforestation, reforestation, soil and mangrove, 20.4%. And then we have the renewable energy, 8.2%, followed by biogas and the others. So I'll skip a few slides, but we've learned a few lessons I would like to share with you. On the lessons that we have learned, we realized that issues of upfront financial cost to project developers is an issue, the risk of overcrediting, and so we have the national buffer account where 1% of credits that is issued is actually retained in the account to solve issues of overcrediting in case it should happen. We also have a very robust national accounting system in place, as well as a national carbon registry also in place. We have also issues of monitoring innovations and then how we plan to also manage expectations. So I'll end here and then thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bempa, for your presentation. It's indeed a fantastic work you have been doing so far at the EPA to put Ghana on the map as far as carbon markets is concerned. So we'll just move into a brief moderated discussion at the moment. Otaviano, I'm interested in hearing your views about Ghana's work so far. Does anything in particular resonate with you?
Well, definitely a very good presentation, and I appreciate it very much. I learned more. I mentioned the case of cook stove of Rwanda, but definitely Ghana is also to be mentioned in that regard. I also appreciated very much the focus on guaranteeing the good quality of MRV, which is fundamental in order to, as I mentioned in my talk, to avoid perceptions, bad perceptions by the population, and therefore not to undermine the carbon pricing policy. So very good. I also, of course, like very much the report on the several partnerships that have been enacted. Some of them, like Liechtenstein, still undergoing, but already installed in Swiss, or the Swiss, Sweden, and Singapore, and so on. One question that I would ask is the extent to which uh, this bilateral individual, Ghana individual countries, could be, let's say, speeded up by looking for broader regional agreements. Say, I think of uh, bilaterally, it's such a large ground to walk through. So many countries and so on, and to the extent of possible, the Europeans have been very active, including putting the carbon border tax adjustment and so on, the CBAN. Uh, but I wonder if uh, it would be conceivable some sort of agreement between Ghana or a cluster of African countries and in the European Union. I'm thinking of the gains of scale if instead of going, of course, it's good that Ghana has those bilateral agreements, but I wonder whether something broader could not be pursued. I also like very much when she described the country process for ITMO authorization, a good example. That's a good template. And I wonder whether there are many differences between the Ghana's system and the ones that exist in the neighbors. I I keep hammering on this on the importance of having a Pan-African approach rather than simply bilaterally, even if while Africa is fragmented not by chance, not by hazard, but to the extent of possible, overcoming or compensating for Africa's fragmentation would be something good for each one, including Ghana. But I appreciate it very much. The lessons that seems that clearly there is a learning process, and as it should be, so as to keep improving what the Ghana's government is doing. Congrats.
Why, thank you on behalf of EPA.
Yeah, thank you.
Do
Thank you,
you have
Prof.
any comments? Yeah.
Yeah, what Prof said, it's really set me thinking. It's going to be very interesting. However, Africa will require a very strategic and then inclusive and very incremental effort in coming up with such a system that we collaborate together on projects. It has to be done very strategically, especially when we have issues of political and economic and social complexities. It's possible, but it's going to be a little bit difficult with these three issues at the forefront of most African countries. Yeah, so that's my initial comment on that. But yeah, we can give it a try.
Yes. There is definitely.
Especially, yeah, if we plan to at least look at the ECOWAS front, we look at SADC or the East
Right.
Africa, and then in that silos, we can try those silos and see how it's going to play out.
Of course, there's talk about an African carbon markets initiative. They have pretty ambitious plans of doing some scaling across the African continent. But as always, the problem is that it's a very diverse continent. There are a lot of considerations to be made. And it is interesting. It will be interesting to see how such a pan-African collaborative effort will work, especially with the AFTA agreement, with the AFTA arrangement, how that could work to kind of pool all the resources we have on the continent and put them to good use. There are a couple of questions that we have put together from participants who registered, and I'll be weaving those in as we go along. But what has struck me is, Juliana, what you said about the lessons you learned from the CDM era and how you have had to learn from those failures to really develop a system that is obviously working. I wonder, Tabiano, is it possible for countries, aside our discussion about regional cooperation, is it possible for countries that have limited institutional capacity to still make some use of the carbon market system?
Uh, yes, but of course, it's going to be harder because of, as I said, social acceptance is fundamental, as well as the acknowledgement of results by outsiders. And as we know, the role to be played by external funding will be fundamental, particularly in the case of smaller and poorer countries. Yes, you have to do it, right? But to the extent of possible, of working with multilateral institutions that can help the country, they have the expertise, they have the experience, and so on. They would be ready to suggest things to be done that would enhance the reliability and the trust on those institutions. There's no option. We will have to do it. These countries will have to do it. It's for their good sake and of the world. No matter how hard things look in terms of cross-national efforts, we're not living through a period in which cooperation in multilateral interaction is a priority. It's a pity. Uh, but the fact of the matter is that you have to pursue it no matter how hard it is to obtain. But definitely, in order to obtain the acknowledgement, they have to be.
Right. Juliana?
Yeah, to add to what Prof said, institutions are very relevant in this regard because it's based on the institutional setup that you have that you're able to come up with. For example, how we came up with the regulatory framework, and then also to be able to have government support. And this, in effect, gives certainty for the private sector to be able to help you as a country to unlock a green investment. Without institutions, how will the private sector have confidence within the system and then come in to be able to unlock investment for you? It becomes difficult. So there should be a very clear path for you to be able to roll out carbon market in your country. If you have good institutional setup, it really helps.
Yes, and come back to the issue of trust, fairness, and equity. Juliana, you talked a lot about the very the structures that you've put in place to ensure that everyone is well informed, that you report accurately on what it is, that the credits that you are handing out to those who are involved in the carbon markets. But I'm also interested. Of course, it's also slightly political, but on the issue of transparency, are you also able, is the Carbon Markets Office able to let the public know, for example, how much, in CD terms, in dollar terms, how much the country has made from these Article 6 projects? I know it's more political to say what the money will be used for, but at least is it possible, on a periodical basis when the reports come out to know exactly how much it is that the country has made from these initiatives?
Okay, so that's a very tricky one. Actually, the CMO, the ministry, is not involved in pricing. Okay, we are not involved in pricing. When it comes to pricing in carbon markets, it's usually determined by the global space. Okay, and so for us, we only make sure that we've provided the enabling environment and not get involved in pricing. usually the project developers go ahead and sign either an EPA or a MOPA with the other party, and then they negotiate on the price. Okay. To tell you specifically how much the carbon market projects have been able to unlock, I wouldn't be able to give you specific details on that. However, when it comes to the Ghana-Swiss agreement, I indicated that 14 projects have been onboarded. And then the estimation that has been done indicates that this is likely to unlock about 850 million US dollars by 2030. That is on the Ghana-Swiss agreement with the 14 projects that have been onboarded. That project, we have been able to do some rough estimate to see how much green investment that those projects will be able to unlock for Ghana within from 2020 that the agreement was signed to 2030. But most of the projects, the 14 projects that have currently been onboarded is what we are looking at currently.
Any comments on this, Octavio?
No.
Right. So there's a question here about what financing models are available to support carbon market participation and project development. I think perhaps Juliana might be able to take that.
Hello. Could you please repeat it?
Right. So the question is, what financing models are available to support carbon market participation and project development? Or is that rather more for Otaviano?
No, Juliana can.
Yeah. Okay. So the carbon pricing instrument for Ghana, we're looking at two main areas. We're looking at the carbon tax. So if you recall, somewhere in 2023, we had the Emissions Levy Act, where government planned to levy 100 Ghana cedi per ton of emissions to the mining, electricity and heating, manufacturing, construction, and then oil and gas sectors. And then we also had, I think, 100 Ghana cedis per ton of emissions for the transport sector. So those of us using vehicles. But this tax had a fixed price per ton of CO2 that is going to be emitted. This tax wasn't implemented because there was really no basis for levying these industries. And so we thought we have to really set back and then conduct a carbon footprint of these industries to be able to have baseline information based on which these carbon taxes will be issued. We also realized that most of these industries are already tax burdened. And so there wasn't the need, or it's not appropriate to go ahead and then come up with carbon taxes. And then we looked at the carbon crediting mechanism, or the CCM, where revenue can be generated from this space. So carbon pricing can actually help you to raise funds for ambitious climate actions, and also to be able to help you with sustainable development goals, to be able to help you achieve them. And so these are the main instruments that Ghana looked at.
Right, and our time is coming up to that time that we have to say goodbye. But I have last questions to ask both of you, Juliana and Otaviano. It's still obviously early days yet for Article 6 and the Paris Agreement even. Where do you expect to see us in about 5 to 10 years? Africa, I mean. What does carbon pricing look like for Africa? Perhaps Taviano first, and then we'll come to Juliana.
Right. I remain optimistic in the following sense. Despite the setbacks in some major countries, what has happened in the US is bad news. Leave by Mr. Trump from the from the Paris conference. In any case, he left. Mr. Biden put the U.S. back. Hopefully, after Trump, we have the return of the U.S. for whoever comes. But the fact of the matter that the rest of the world has to keep moving and developing. A coalition of the willing has been the phrase given to those countries that want to keep the closest possible the previous multilateral system, and that applies definitely to the case of carbon policies. One point, and Antonio, Helen asked a question about uh, carbon tax vis-a-vis carbon trading, and that reminded me of an experience that I had back in 2007. Yes, when I was in a G20 sponsored debate with Monsieur Jean-Pierre Landau, the French economist, in a debate in which I incarnated the carbon trading approach, cap and trade, and he defended the carbon tax. And my argument is that at least with the cap and trade, the proceeds go to developing countries that could offer carbon reduction for a premium and so on. And whereas he argued that the carbon tax could be used as well to pay these countries. And we had a discussion but anyway, the two systems are let's say, not compatible. Either you go for uh, something close to a cap and trade, or you implement a carbon tax. They're not, wherever they exist, must go hand in hand. And the educational principle, Helen, this is general. The communication by authorities with the population to let them understand what's going on and what they are expected to do is fundamental in all policies, including the carbon pricing policies. And once again, this reinforced the relevance of having the MRV system in place. Thank you.
Juliana?
Yeah, and thanks very much. I believe that Africa is highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, and there are opportunities for Africa to build resilience, and this includes carbon markets. We have to take advantage of it now. I'm very positive, just as Prof said, very positive when it comes to the outlook within the next 10 years. That if all African countries would try and walk the path of Ghana to enhance economic growth and also their climate resilience, as well as sustainable development, it would go a long way to help African countries. We should come together and then try and walk the path of Ghana. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, both of you. And on that note, it's about time to sign off on this webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure to have both of you, Mrs. Juliana Bempa and Otaviano Canuto. I've learned so much, and I'm sure our audience have also benefited a lot from the discussions. And the talks will continue, especially here on the African continent, about climate change and things we can do to mitigate, things we can do to make ourselves resilient for what's already happened. And we hope that at another time and on another platform, we can continue these conversations. Thanks to all of you, and have a good evening, good night, wherever you are. Do take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. A pleasure.